The first crash jolted me out of my chair like a gunshot. I sprinted to the front door, heart hammering, just in time to see Karen Whitmore, the HOA vice president and neighborhood terror, stomping off my porch with a smug little nod to herself. At her feet, my brand new porch lights lay shattered glass glinting under the morning sun. I yanked the door open. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" She spun around like she'd been waiting for me. "Nathaniel Larson, I've warned you. Those lights are a violation of the community standards. Too bright, too flashy, totally unacceptable." I blinked at her, stunned. "You're kidding me." "I submitted the design to the board and got it approved." Karen crossed her arms, short blonde hair stiff in the breeze. "Well, I didn't approve it, and what I say goes." I stared at the debris, anger boiling up my spine. "You can't just destroy my property." Karen shrugged like it was nothing. "Maybe next time you'll ask permission the right way." I didn't waste another second. I pulled out my phone, snapped close-up photos of the smashed lights and a few more of Karen standing right there, arms crossed, looking proud of herself. "You're going to regret this," I said. Karen scoffed and strutted off down the sidewalk, her heels clicking with every step. "Good luck with that, Nathaniel." I slammed the door, heart racing. I knew the HOA was full of petty tyrants, but this was criminal. I wasn't about to let her get away with it, not this time. Grabbing my laptop, I pulled up the HOA board's email and attached every single picture I had, the broken lights, the timestamp, the smug look on Karen's face. I kept my message short and sweet. Destruction of private property by HOA board member Karen Whitmore. Immediate action requested. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, adrenaline still buzzing through my veins. One way or another, this was going to blow up, and I was ready. I barely had time to shut my laptop when my phone rang. It was George Tully, the HOA president. His voice crackled through the speaker, tight and urgent. "Nathaniel, we need you at the clubhouse. Now." There was no apology, no explanation, just an order, typical George, but I wasn't about to argue. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, locking the door behind me. The clubhouse was only a few blocks away, nestled between manicured hedges and a pointless decorative fountain that never actually worked. When I walked in, every board member except Karen sat around the long oak table. Their faces were a mix of panic and forced neutrality, like kids caught holding matches near a pile of gasoline. George gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." I pulled the chair out slowly, the legs scraping against the tile. "All right, I'm here." "Now what?" George cleared his throat and tapped a manila folder in front of him. "We received your email and the photos." His hand twitched. "Is there any more evidence?" I leaned back, folding my arms. "More than enough. Security footage too, high definition." Shows her walking right up, smashing the lights, and walking away. A ripple went through the room. Mary Ellis, the secretary, dropped her pen. George's face paled. "You're willing to provide that footage?" I kept my voice even. "Already pulled it off the DVR." "It's on a flash drive in my pocket." He hesitated, then nodded. "Good, we'll need it." Across the table, Richard Weller, the treasurer, rubbed his temples. "This is serious vandalism. If the police get involved, it could reflect badly on the board." I didn't blink. "Then maybe you should have kept a closer eye on your vice president." Mary swallowed hard. "Nathaniel, we had no idea. Karen, she's been difficult lately, but we never thought." I cut her off. "She's been more than difficult. She's been threatening people, harassing them over nonsense violations. Enforcing rules that don't exist. You've all let it happen." Silence dropped over the room like a curtain. George finally spoke, voice brittle. "We're calling an emergency vote. Effective immediately." I watched as they passed around slips of paper, each board member scribbling quickly, heads down. They folded the ballots and dropped them into a ceramic bowl at the center of the table. Mary gave it a quick stir, then pulled them out one by one, reading aloud. "Remove. Remove, remove, remove." All 4 votes. George let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. "Karen Whitmore is hereby removed from the HOA Board of Directors, effective immediately." I didn't move. I wasn't finished. "That's not enough," I said. George stiffened. What more do you want? I laid the flash drive on the table. You're going to report this to the police. File an incident report, property damage, trespassing, harassment, everything. Mary's hand fluttered to her mouth. Richard leaned forward, voice low. Nathaniel, are you sure you want to escalate it? I stared him down. She escalated it, not me. George looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders sagged. Fine. We'll file the report. And, I added, you're going to send a letter to every homeowner explaining exactly why she was removed. No vague personal reasons, full transparency. Mary's pen hovered uncertainly above her notepad. That could expose us to liability. No, I said, letting the word hang heavy in the air. It's how you avoid it. You show people you're willing to hold your own accountable. George gave a reluctant nod. We'll draft something by the end of the day. Satisfied, I stood. One more thing. They all looked up. If any of you retaliate against me for this, I've got a lawyer ready to file a harassment suit so fast your heads will spin. Nobody said a word. I left them sitting there, stunned and scrambling, and walked out into the crisp afternoon without looking back. By the time I got home, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalks. Word spread fast in our little community, and people were already murmuring about Karen's downfall. I caught snippets as I walked past. She finally went too far. Did you hear she smashed his lights? Like with a hammer or something? What's wrong with her? I didn't say anything. Just gave a slight nod to Mrs. Patel, who lived 2 doors down and had been one of Karen's frequent targets. She gave me a grateful smile in return. I barely closed the door when another knock sounded sharp and frantic. I opened it to find Officer Reyes standing there, notepad in hand. She flashed her badge. Mr. Larson, I'm here about the incident with Miss Whitmore. I stepped aside to let her in. Once we were seated at the kitchen table, I slid the flash drive across to her. Everything's on there, footage, timestamps, photos. I also have a written statement if you need it. Officer Reyes raised an eyebrow. You're thorough. I've had to be. She's been harassing people for months. She nodded, scribbling notes. We're charging her with criminal mischief and trespassing. Depending on the damage value, it could escalate to a felony. I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. Good. Officer Reyes tucked the flash drive into an evidence bag and stood. We'll keep you updated. After she left, I sat in the quiet, feeling the weight of the day hit me all at once, but it wasn't over yet. By sunset, a bright yellow notice was taped to the community bulletin board. Karen Whitmore has been removed from the HOA board for misconduct, including destruction of personal property. The board does not condone these actions and is cooperating with law enforcement. Below it, a line of signatures: George Tully, Mary Ellis, Richard Weller, and 2 alternates who'd been pulled in to solidify the vote. The next morning brought an even bigger surprise. A moving van idled in front of Karen's house. She stood on the driveway, shrieking into her phone, gesturing wildly at the board members who stood at a polite but firm distance. Neighbors gathered, whispering behind hands, pretending to water lawns or walk dogs just to watch the show. I stayed on my porch, coffee in hand, watching as she loaded the last box into the truck. When she finally turned to leave, her glare swept over the neighborhood and landed squarely on me. For a moment, her mouth opened like she might say something. But then she thought better of it, spun on her heel and climbed into the truck. The engine roared to life. The moving van rattled down the street and disappeared around the corner, leaving nothing behind but the faint stench of burned bridges. A few minutes later, George walked up my driveway. He looked smaller without Karen's shadow looming over him. He cleared his throat awkwardly. Nathaniel, we're holding a special election next month. We could use someone who actually cares about the community. I sipped my coffee. I'll think about it. He gave a quick nod and left me to my morning, standing there, watching the sun rise over a neighborhood that finally felt a little freer. I realized something. Bullies like Karen only win when good people stay quiet, and around here, we were finally done being quiet. A week passed, and the neighborhood buzzed with a new kind of energy. People who used to keep their heads down now waved when passing. The atmosphere felt lighter, almost like someone had lifted a heavy tarp off all the houses. For the first time since I moved here, it felt like home, not some fiefdom run by a petty tyrant. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and bathed the streets in a warm gold, I was hauling some mulch bags from my truck when a voice called out hesitantly, "Mr. Larson?" I turned to see a woman standing on the sidewalk, short, mid-40s, glasses slipping down her nose. I recognized her vaguely. She lived 3 streets over. "Yes." I set the bags down and wiped my hands. She stepped closer, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. "I'm Melanie. I just wanted to say thank you. A lot of us were too scared to speak up before." I nodded. "I get it." Melanie hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There's something you should know. Karen wasn't working alone." I stiffened. "What do you mean?" She and George were funneling HOA funds. Tiny amounts at first, fake maintenance invoices, absurd landscaping fees. But last year it got worse. Thousands missing. People complained, but George buried it. That stopped me cold. I had known the board was sloppy, but outright theft. That was a whole different battlefield. "Do you have proof?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Melanie fumbled in her tote bag and pulled out a battered manila envelope. She offered it to me with both hands like a sacred offering. "My husband works in accounting. He kept copies of the annual financials, highlighted the discrepancies. We tried to report it once, but George threatened to fine us into bankruptcy for non-compliance violations. We backed off." I weighed the envelope in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the gravity of everything that had gone wrong here. "Thank you for trusting me," I said. Melanie gave a tight nod and walked away quickly, head down. Inside, I spread the contents of the envelope across my kitchen table. Scanned receipts, payment records, bank statements. Red circles and angry underlines in the margins. The numbers didn't just look suspicious. They screamed fraud. I spent the next 4 hours cross-referencing every document. Melanie's husband had been thorough. Fake vendors, padded expenses, maintenance work that never happened. And George's signature on every authorization. By midnight, I had organized everything into a neat packet. I made 3 copies, one for the police, one for the state attorney's office, and one for myself. At dawn, I drove to the police station. Officer Reyes was there, sipping coffee at the front desk. She looked up, surprised. "Nathaniel," I dropped the packet onto the counter. "You're going to want to see this." She thumbed through the pages, eyebrows rising higher with each turn. When she finished, she looked up, her face unreadable. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, a detective in a rumpled suit joined her. He introduced himself as Detective Marquez and ushered me into a small interview room. He leaned back in his chair, flipping through the documents. "How did you get these?" I explained about Melanie, the threats, everything. Marquez tapped a pen against the table. "This is solid, very solid, enough to open an official investigation." He paused, studying me. "You willing to make a formal statement?" Without hesitation, I nodded. "Absolutely." It took hours. They recorded everything. Copies were made. By the time I left the station, the sun was high overhead and I was running on fumes and vending machine coffee. As I pulled into my driveway, a black SUV I didn't recognize was parked across the street. Inside, George sat behind the wheel, glaring at me through dark sunglasses. I didn't flinch. I didn't wave. I just walked calmly to my door and disappeared inside, locking it behind me. The next few days were tense. Unmarked police cars cruised the neighborhood. Subpoenas were issued. Then one afternoon, it all came crashing down. I was watering my front lawn when a convoy of squad cars rolled up to George's house. Officers poured out, surrounding the property. One read aloud from a warrant while George stood on his porch, red-faced and shouting. Neighbors poured onto their lawns, phones raised, recording every second. George tried to argue, tried to shove the warrant back at the officer. Bad move. 2 officers grabbed him, cuffed him, and marched him to a waiting cruiser. The moment the car doors slammed shut, a cheer broke out. People clapped. Some even whistled. It wasn't just about George, it was about everything he and Karen had done to us all. Detective Marquez caught my eye across the crowd and gave a small nod. I nodded back. Later that evening, Melanie and a few others came by with folding chairs and a cooler full of sodas. We sat on my driveway, laughing and swapping stories about the years of nonsense we'd endured under the old regime. Melanie leaned over at one point and said, "You know, there's going to be a full audit now. The county's involved. They're tearing through years of records." I took a sip of my drink and smiled. Good, let them dig. The next morning, an emergency HOA meeting was called. This time, it was announced via email and posted flyers: no secret gatherings, no intimidation. The clubhouse overflowed with homeowners. People I had never seen before showed up, faces lit with cautious hope. Mary Ellis, the only remaining board member not implicated, stood at the front. She looked nervous but determined. "We need to rebuild," she said, "and we need to elect a new board." Ballots were handed out right then and there. Volunteers, not the board, counted the votes in full view of everyone. When the dust settled, I had been elected president. It wasn't something I had planned for, but as I stood in front of my neighbors, I realized it felt right. I promised transparency. I promised accountability. And most importantly, I promised that no one in this neighborhood would ever be bullied or threatened again. Real change didn't happen overnight. We had to hire a forensic accountant to untangle years of financial mess. We had to renegotiate contracts with legitimate vendors. We had to draft new bylaws that made it nearly impossible for any one person to grab too much power. But day by day, we rebuilt. One evening, as I was locking up the clubhouse after another long meeting, Melanie caught me by the door. "You know," she said, "you didn't just fix the lights." I raised an eyebrow. "No," she grinned. "You flipped the switch on the whole neighborhood." I laughed, the sound echoing into the cool night. Sometimes it only takes one broken light to expose everything hiding in the dark. The first few weeks after the election felt like trying to rebuild a house during a storm. Every day, new problems surfaced: unpaid bills disguised as maintenance costs, missing records, suspicious contracts that led nowhere. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. At the next open meeting, I brought in a forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana who had uncovered embezzlement rings in corporate audits before. She stood at the front of the clubhouse, her voice cutting through the humid evening air. "Preliminary findings show over $75,000 unaccounted for," Dana announced, flipping through a thick binder. The money was siphoned through ghost vendors, fake repairs, and falsified reimbursements approved by George and signed off by Karen. Murmurs filled the room, shock rippling across the crowd like a wave. This wasn't just bad management, it was outright theft. A man from the back, Mr. Ortega, who usually kept to himself, stood up. "What happens now?" Dana closed the binder with a snap. "The county prosecutor's office has opened a formal investigation. Criminal charges are pending against both individuals." I stepped forward. "The HOA will be listed as a victim in the case. We're cooperating fully, and we're going after civil damages too, every penny they stole." A woman near the front, Mrs. Chang, raised her hand. "Will homeowners have to pay for the missing funds?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not. We're freezing unnecessary expenditures, renegotiating contracts, and cutting every non-essential cost until we're stable. We're not punishing the community for their crimes." The room buzzed with cautious relief. For the first time, people weren't being treated like wallets with feet. The following day, 2 detectives visited my house again. Detective Marquez, now accompanied by a younger partner named Holt, laid out a search warrant on my coffee table. "We're seizing the HOA's old financial servers," Marquez said. "We got a tip that George and Karen kept digital backups of transactions they never reported." I led them to the clubhouse, using my newly issued master keys. Inside, Holt pulled open a locked filing cabinet, revealing a dusty laptop and several external hard drives. "Looks like Christmas came early," Holt muttered, bagging the evidence. As the detectives packed up, Marquez turned to me. "You did the right thing, Larson. Most people never dig deep enough to find this stuff." I nodded, feeling the weight of it all settle into my bones. It's not about digging, it's about refusing to let people like them win. He gave a rare smile and clapped me on the shoulder. "Keep it up." Over the next month, subpoenas flew like autumn leaves. George was indicted on multiple counts of grand larceny and fraud. Karen, already facing charges for destruction of property and harassment, now found herself dragged into the embezzlement scandal as a co-conspirator. When the day of the preliminary hearing arrived, several of us from the neighborhood attended. The courthouse was a gray, imposing structure, its hallways buzzing with attorneys and clerks. I sat quietly among the rows of benches, watching as George and Karen were led in wearing handcuffs and prison jumpsuits. Their attorney tried to argue that the missing funds were due to accounting errors, but Dana's forensic report, backed by bank statements and vendor testimonies, crushed that defense within minutes. The judge, a stern woman who looked like she took no nonsense, denied bail for George, citing flight risk. Karen was released on strict house arrest conditions. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, shoving microphones into faces. I kept my head down and walked straight to my truck. I hadn't done this for the attention. I did it because it was right. Back home, the neighborhood had already begun to change. Fences were being mended, not just the physical ones, but the invisible ones between neighbors. People who once avoided each other now traded gardening tips and borrowed tools. One Saturday, a group of volunteers gathered at the clubhouse for a community cleanup. Melanie organized a bake sale to raise money for new playground equipment. Mr. Ortega offered to repaint the faded street signs for free. Even Mrs. Patel, who used to avoid HOA events like the plague, showed up with a tray of samosas. As I hammered a new community bulletin board into place near the entrance, a boy rode by on his bike and waved. "Thanks, Mr. Larson." He shouted. I gave a small wave back, feeling something loosen in my chest. Maybe for the first time, this place felt alive. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the board held its first official open forum. No hidden agendas, no closed-door votes. Melanie read from a list of proposed amendments to the bylaws. First item: any financial transaction over $1,000 requires prior approval by a majority of homeowners, not just the board. Cheers rose from the crowd. Richard, now serving as treasurer after a special election, followed with another proposal. Annual audits must be conducted by an independent third party and made available to all residents in full. More applause. We passed every reform unanimously. People signed up for committees. Teenagers offered to manage the community website. Retirees volunteered to run the library corner in the clubhouse. It wasn't just about fixing what had been broken, it was about building something better. As the meeting wrapped up, Mary approached me, balancing a clipboard in one hand. "You know," she said, "there's talk of nominating you for Community Leadership Awards." I laughed softly. "Let's get through 1 year without a scandal first." She smiled warmly. "Fair enough." That night I sat on my porch, the new lights casting a soft, perfect glow across the yard. They weren't flashy, just right. Across the street, Melanie and her husband set up a fire pit in their driveway. Neighbors gathered, hauling over lawn chairs and marshmallows. Someone strummed a guitar. Laughter floated through the air, light and unburdened. I leaned back in my chair, watching the stars blink into existence above. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. It would never be. There would always be disagreements, petty squabbles, the usual growing pains of a community finding its way, but we had proven something important. When faced with corruption, we didn't crumble. We fought back. We stood together. And we won, not because we were fearless, but because we refused to be silent, because sometimes it only takes one shattered light to reveal just how much darkness had been hiding in plain sight. And sometimes, all it takes to drive that darkness out is for good people to finally, stubbornly, turn the lights back on.